Hello everyone, hope all of you are safe and healthy. Coming to IASbaba's rapid revision series for Prelims 2021, this is session 35 and day 47. And today's topics are disaster management, UN bodies for environment and environment related conventions. Then these are the hot topics we are going to discuss. The first one is Darwin's Nightmare, and then international treaties for disaster management, an overview, and then Sendai Framework, the most current one, and then the carbon credits and the related concepts, and then United Nations organizations related to environment, and then international conventions on environment and NGOs for environmental conservation. Friends, here we give an overview, and in the subsequent classes we will take each NGOs and conventions and we will discuss the most important ones in detail. And then the Disaster Management Institutes of India, and then the retrons and mRNA. Friends, in retrons and mRNA, we take up some of the important discussions related to genetic engineering. That is how CRISPR-Cas9 and others will work. So, coming to the first one, the Darwin's Nightmare. Friends, why was it in news? Because Lake Victoria is suffering from many problems other than Darwin's Nightmare. So, in other words, Lake Victoria is already suffering from Darwin's Nightmare. So, what is this Darwin's Nightmare? This is a fish called Nile perch. So, this fish was introduced into Lake Victoria for the commercial fishing basis, and this fish, whose scientific name is Latus niloticus, it is being acting as invasive alien species and it is harming the biodiversity of Lake Victoria, and it belongs to class Osteichthyes and subclass Actinopterygii and the phylum Chordata and kingdom Animalia. And now coming to other problem which is haunting Lake Victoria, that is the cyanobacteria or the blue-green algae. Friends, blue-green algae is not an algae, it is a bacteria and it belongs to kingdom Monera or kingdom Minors. Friends, the scientific classification and nomenclatures are being asked by UPSC. So, in the last or before last year, the Prosopis juliflora was asked, and in 2016 or 17 paper, the phylum Annelida was directly asked. So, in this context, we will revise some of the scientific nomenclatures. Friends, Robert Whittaker, he came up with 5 kingdom classification, that is kingdom Monera, Protista, kingdom Fungi, kingdom Plantae and Animalia. So, friends, we will not by heart, we will learn the meaning and move on. Friends, kingdom Monera or kingdom of minors. So, here Mycoplasma, bacteria, Actinomycetes, cyanobacteria are those prokaryotes which doesn't have a proper nucleus, they are included here. And then protozoans, phytoplanktons, zooplanktons. So, protozoans like Euglena, Paramecium, amoeba, all those things will be included here. And then fungi, molds, mushrooms and yeasts, they will be included. And then kingdom Plantae, here Thallophyta, Bryophyta and Pteridophyta. So, here friends, the Thallophyta means that which cannot stand erect, that which is thallus or weak or which doesn't have a proper stem. And then Bryophyta, stem is present but not so demarcated, and Pteridophyta means that which is mature, and this belongs to cryptogams or whose gams or sexual organs are hidden or they are very minute. So, there is no differentiated seeds among them. And then coming to phanerogams or whose gams or sexual organs or seeds are visible completely. And there are 2 types of phanerogams, they are gymnospermae and angiospermae. So, gymnospermae means that which exposes. So, just like bodybuilders, they expose. Gymno means to expose. And then angiospermae. So, these angiosperms, they have seeds uncovered within the fruits. So, here angio means that which is covered. So, we learnt about angioplasty, angiography, etc. So, that which is done inside. So, under the cover. And this angiospermae, it is divided into monocotyledonous and dicotyledonous plants. So, this is all about kingdom Plantae. And then coming to kingdom Animalia. Friends, kingdom Animalia is a vast concept and it is divided into several phylum. So, first one is phylum Porifera or the pores, which has pores all over the body. Example, the sponges, they have pores. And then phylum Nidaria or phylum Coelenterata, that phylum which has a coelon or a single mouth throughout the body. So, a radial symmetrical body which has a single mouth comes under phylum Nidaria. And then phylum Mollusca, which has a shell. So, for example, snails which have a shell, they come under Mollusca. And then phylum Echinodermata, or which has a spiny skin. Derma means skin, echino means spines. So for example, sea urchin, sea stars, they all come under phylum Echinodermata. And then phylum Platyhelminthes or flatworms. Platy means flat. And then phylum Nematode or phylum Aschelminthes or roundworms. So these come under phylum Nematode. And phylum Annelida. Phylum Annelida means segmented body. Just like the earthworms, their body is segmented. And then phylum Arthropoda or the jointed legs. So like the grasshopper, the cockroaches, how their legs are jointed. And then lastly phylum Chordata. So in the Chordata we have subphylums like Hemichordata, Urochordata and Vertebrata. And in Vertebrata we have several classes like Pisces, Osteichthyes, Chondrichthyes, Aves and Mammalia. And man belongs to Mammalia. So this is a brief revision regarding the nomenclature. Then come to next, the conventions for disaster management. So we will revise what are the conventions here, friends. So why was it in news? Because it will always be in news as prime ministers they speak in the international conferences like G20 etc. So we need not search for importance exclusively for these matters. Now we will begin with the 1989 International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction, 1990 to 1999. So this was adopted by UN General Assembly. So this was the first initiative for disaster risk reduction. And then in the mid of this decade, in 1994, the first World Conference on Disaster Reduction, 1995 to 2005 the targets, it was adopted, and this was famously called the Yokohama Strategy for the Safer World. So 1995 to 2005 we can call it as Yokohama Age, and this propagated for prevention, preparedness and mitigation and its plan of action. And then in 1999, International Strategy for Disaster Risk Reduction. So UNISDR, it was launched in order to implement these Yokohama and other protocols. And this was launched by Economic and Social Council or the UN ECOSOC. And then together with this UNISDR, the Interagency Task Force on Disaster Reduction or the IATF was also launched. So they will implement the Yokohama strategy. And then in 2002, the World Summit on Sustainable Development was held in Johannesburg. So this is nothing but the Rio Plus 10. And here the Johannesburg Action Plan, it provided UNISDR and IATF a set of objectives for integrating risk reduction into developmental policies. So now the risk reduction was integrated with the developmental policies. So here somewhere around 2002 comes the Johannesburg Summit, and this we can take it as Johannesburg Action Plan. And then come to next 2005, the second World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction and the Hyogo Framework for Action, that was adopted for 2005 to 2015. So Hyogo Framework for Action, it provided for building the resilience of the nations and communities to disasters. So now along with the development, community life was also included. And then in 2007, first session of Global Platform of Disaster Reduction, this was started. And what is this global platform, friends? This helps in assessing the disaster strategies. And Global Platform on Disaster Risk Reduction, it was set up by UN General Assembly to support or to assess Hyogo Framework. So even in India, we have National Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction. So what work they do? They assess the disaster plans. And then in 2011, the Istanbul Program for Action was started. And here the program for action of the least developed countries for the decade 2011 and 2020. So Istanbul Program is important because it catered to the least developed countries. And then in 2012, the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development or the Rio 20, it started for the post-2015 framework. So in this regard, in 2015, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction was taken place, and this is running currently. And moreover, in 2014 itself, the third International Conference on Small Island Developing States, they adopted Small Island Developing States Accelerated Modalities of Action or the Samoa path. So here Istanbul and Samoa will be different, all others will be on a sequence of these international disaster management conferences. So we can take as the Yokohama, then Hyogo and Sendai eras of disaster risk reduction frameworks. So this is all about the conventions on disaster. Then coming to next, Sendai Framework. Friends, Sendai Framework is the most recent one and the targets may be asked for prelims. So that is why we take up. Then coming to the Sendai Framework, setting 4 specific priorities of action. So what are those? First one, understanding the disaster risk. Then strengthening the disaster risk governance to manage the disaster. And then investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience. And then enhancing the disaster preparedness. So USIP, so your SIP, you can remember likewise, and enhancing the disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation and reconstruction. So these are the 4 targets, and coming to more details. So the global targets are aiming to reduce the average per 1 lakh global mortality between 2020 to 2030. So friends, all these targets are in comparison to 2005 and 2015 data. So when compared to 2005 to 2015, our mortality per lakh should be substantially reduced. And then coming to the same 2005 to 2015 data, the number of affected people per lakh should also be reduced by 2030. And then substantially reduce the impact of disaster in relation to global gross domestic product. So that is, the economic losses of disaster should also be substantially reduced by 2030 when compared to 2005-2015 era. And then reduce disaster damage to critical infrastructure, that is the cyber infrastructure and health and educational facilities by 2030. So along with the economic losses, these losses, health and education losses should be minimized. Then substantially increase the number of countries with the national and local disaster risk reduction strategies by 2030. So by 2030, more number of nations should come up with local disaster risk strategies. And then substantially enhance the international cooperation to developing countries for implementation of the framework by 2030. So you not only develop but also help the developing countries to develop the resilience against the disaster. And then substantially increase the access to multi-hazard early warning systems and disaster risk information and assessments to the people by 2030. So every people in every nook and corner of the world, they should have access to these early warning systems and disaster information. So these are the overall targets. Friends, one thing is that this Sendai framework didn't provide any percentages or any targets per se. It only says that we have to reduce all these things substantially. So when the word substantially comes, the statement will be correct, and if any percentage comes, it will be wrong. So be careful while ticking the answer here. Then come to next, carbon credits. So friends, we have been hearing the concepts like cap and trade, emission trade, carbon offset trade, then carbon credits. Then we also hear in the Kyoto Protocol, that is international emission trading, clean development mechanism, joint implementation. Friends, what are these? So we will discuss with an example. Consider I am running a tire factory. So for tire factory, we need intense heat, and I use coal furnaces for heating the rubber. So these coal furnaces, when we heat the coal, it will emit CO2. You agree with me? And now the government has imposed 40 tons of CO2 against me. So this 40 tons of CO2 is the cap on me. I cannot emit more than 40 tons of CO2 per year. So due to this, what I do is that I replace these coal furnaces with the electric furnaces. So when I use the electric furnaces, then I will end up emitting only 35 tons of CO2. So this 5 tons of CO2 I will be saving. So this 5 tons of CO2 I can sell to others. So someone like a steel factory owner, he can approach me and he can pay me some money and he can take this 5 tons. That is, he will emit 5 tons instead of me, and in turn he will give money to me. So this is the cap and trade. Now coming to carbon offset trading. So what is this offset trading, friends? Coming back to the same rubber factory. Friends, installing these electric furnaces can cost me 2 crores of rupees. But however, this 2 crores is too costly for me. So now what I do is that instead of installing these electric furnaces, I will use the coal furnaces itself. But at the end of the day, I end up emitting 45 tons of carbon. Now what I do, in order to offset this, I will establish a windmill in the shores of Kerala Gujarat or any other places. And now friends, I generate 5 gigawatts of electricity by these windmills per year. And we know that the same thermal power plants, to generate 5 gigawatts of electricity, they will emit 5 tons of carbon dioxide. So now indirectly I have saved these 5 tons from being emitted. I have offset these 5 tons from being emitted. So now I have exceeded the target, but I have offset this target. So this is carbon offsets. Now consider, I have implemented both. I have installed the electric furnaces. At the same time, I have also installed the windmills. So now what happens friends? I will not only get these 5 tons of this cap and trade facility, but also I will get these 5 gigawatts of the offset trade facility. So both the ways I will get 5 credits each. Or in other words, I can trade 10 carbon credits per year if I install both. So this is how the cap and trade and carbon offset trading works. Now coming to Kyoto Protocol. Friends, Kyoto Protocol was the first convention which provided for this carbon trading, and it provided for some of the measures like the international emissions trading. This IET, it provides economic incentives for reducing the emissions, or this is a cap and trade facility. So I replace the coal furnaces with the electric furnaces and I will earn the credits. And then clean development mechanism. So here, instead of me reducing the carbon emission, I will reach the limits, but however, I will fund the carbon offset projects in the non-annexer 1 countries. So here I will get economic benefits because the cost spent for installing electric furnaces will be much more compared to the installation of windmills in developing countries. So there the raw materials to establish windmills will also be cheaper. So I can get away with 50 lakh rupees rather than spending 2 crore rupees in installing the electric furnaces. So this is offset trading. And here the carbon credit is named as emission reduction units or the certified emission reduction units. So these certified emission reduction units are traded for the carbon offset trade and IETs are traded for the cap and trade. And coming to next, joint implementation. So joint implementation is very much similar to clean development mechanism, but here I am implementing that windmill in another Annex 1 country or in another developed nation. So if I don't get opportunity to implement the windmill in any developing nation, I can choose even the developed nation and implement the same. But however, the credits I get will be different and also the money saved will be less. So this is all about the 3 instruments of Kyoto Protocol. I hope you have understood. Then coming to next, the UN organizations related to environment. Friends, here once again we will divide this into 1972 to 92 era, then 92 to 2002 era, and 2002 to 2012 era, and 2012 and after. So United Nations Conference on Human Environment in Stockholm in 1972, that took place in 1972 for the first time. And in the very first conference, the UNEP was established. And then the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, it was held in Rio in 1992, the famous Earth Summit. And here the Agenda 21 or the agenda for the 21st century was adopted. So here comes the Rio. Then the World Summit on Sustainable Development, the Rio Plus 10, was held in Johannesburg. And later, the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, Rio Plus 20 or the Rio Plus 20 Earth Summit, it happened in 2012. So currently we are running with the Rio Plus 20. But apart from that, friends, every year there will be UNFCCC convention and there will be UNFCCC meeting going on. So in one of the important meetings in 1997, the Kyoto Protocol was taken up and discussed. But however, Kyoto Protocol got delayed due to various reasons and it was only implemented in 2005 and the targets were taken up for 2005 to 2012. And later, after 2012 to till 2020, the Doha Amendment to Kyoto Protocol was taken up. And then in between, in 2007, Bali Action Plan of UNFCCC was discussed. And in this Bali Action Plan, for the first time, the loss and damage concept was discussed. That is, the developed nation, they should pay the developing nations for the loss and damage concept. So it is here that India and China, they emerged as the heroes of developing countries. So they emerged as the leaders of G77. And then the latest, the 2015 Paris Climate, that brought up the independent nationally determined contributions. So, in this context, the Indian INDCs will become important. And friends, various other summits have also been held, that is Cancun Summit, Lima Summit and others, but they are not so important because nothing substantial took place there. Then come to next, we take up some of the important UN bodies. First is the UNEP itself. It was set up in the Stockholm Summit, you know that, and UNEP hosts the secretariats of various conventions. Like the CITES, we have studied the Appendix 1 and Appendix 2 of CITES in the last classes. Then we also have Convention on Biodiversity, and then Minamata Conference for Mercury, and then Convention for Migratory Species or the Bonn Convention. So, all these secretaries are hosted by UNEP, and then UNEP is also one of the implementing agencies of Global Environmental Facility. Come to next, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So, this is an expert body, friends, and it provides the report, and this was set up in 1988 by World Meteorological Department and UNEP. So, both WMO and UNEP, they are the specialist agencies of UN and they set up this IPCC. And coming to WMO itself, it was set up way back in 1950 and it originated from the International Meteorological Organization via Vienna International Meteorological Congress of 1873. So, this can be very old, and then it became a specialized agency of UN in 1951. And the United Nations Economic and Social Council is the parent organization of UN's WMO. So, this hosts the secretariat, funding, etc. of the WMO. So, these are some of the important organizations. We will take up more in the subsequent classes. Then come to next, the International Conventions on Environment. So, here we will take up as many conventions as possible, friends. Coming to first one, Ramsar Convention. Friends, we have already discussed Ramsar Conventions regarding the wetlands, and Ramsar Convention also speaks about Montreux's record. So, what is Montreux's record? It is a record of those lakes or those wetlands which are already in the verge of destruction and extinction. So, those lakes which require attention are placed in the Montreux's record. So, what are the Indian lakes that are present in the Montreux's record? Post me in the comment box. Then come to next, Stockholm Convention. So, this deals with the persistent organic pollutions. So, that is those chemicals like DDT, endrin, heptachlor, heptachlorobenzene, etc. Those will remain in environment for longer periods. And then coming to CITES, we have discussed CITES, and that is Trade in Endangered Species. Then Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD. So, that deals with conservation, sustainable use and benefit sharing of biodiversity. So, whatever biodiversity is there, it has to be shared with the free and frank basis. Then Bonn Convention, or the conservation of migratory species, especially the birds and migratory animals. Then Vienna Convention on the ozone layer, and the Montreal Protocol. So, that also deals with the ozone layer, but that caters to the substances that deplete ozone layer, mainly the chlorofluorocarbon. Then come to next, Basel Convention. So, friends, Basel Convention deals with the transboundary movement of hazardous waste and the disposal of such wastes. So, we have heard about the dumping backyard nations, wherein the developed nations, they dump these hazardous wastes in the developing nations or the underdeveloped nations. So, it is related to that the Basel Convention deals with. And then Rotterdam Convention. So, that deals with prior informed consent for the international trade in the hazardous chemicals and pesticides. So, while Basel Convention deals with the hazardous wastes, Rotterdam Convention deals with the hazardous chemicals which are useful and which can be traded. And then Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. So, that deals with transport and use of living modified organisms. So, those genetically modified organisms are dealt by Cartagena Protocol. And then UN-RED, or reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. So, RED deals with the deforestation and forest degradation, and later UN-RED was added with the UN-RED+, or in other words, along with reducing the emission from deforestation, these developing nations, they should also help the developing countries in afforestation. So, this afforestation comes with this plus symbol. And then Nagoya Protocol, that deals with fair access to genetic resources. So, genetic resources like DNA, RNA, proteins, etc. are dealt by Nagoya Protocol. And then Kigali Amendment to Montreal Protocol. So, this is an amendment to Montreal Protocol, and it says that not just the chlorofluorocarbons that has to be curbed, but also the hydrofluorocarbons has to be curbed in order to save the ozone layer. And then Minamata Convention, that is adverse effect of mercury. So all these are conventions which are important and which can be asked in the form of match the following or others. Then come to next, NGOs for environmental conservation. So first one, the IUCN. It is the world's oldest and largest global environmental organization. So this comes up with the red list of endangered and extinct species. So the red data book is the famous production of IUCN. And then the Global Environmental Facility. Yes, we discussed this in the last slide, and here it was established as a $1 billion pilot program, and this works under the aegis of World Bank. Friends, in one class we will discuss what is Global Environmental Facility, what is Green Climate Fund, what is Green Climate Change Fund, etc. So as of now this is sufficient. Then Global Green Growth Institute. So GGGI was first launched as a think tank, and it was later converted into an international treaty based organization at the Rio Plus 20 summit. So this summit makes the GGGI important. And then International Whaling Organization. It was set up under the International Convention for Regulation of Whaling. So Japan has reintroduced whaling, so that is why this organization becomes important. And then coming to next, German Watch. Friends, German Watch caters to environmental relation between industrialized and non-industrialized countries. So this one organization is working on the pursuits of loss and damage concept. So this comes up with some of the important reports like the Climate Change Performance Index and the Global Climate Risk Index. And then World Wildlife Fund. Friends, World Wildlife Fund is doing meticulous job in conserving wildlife, and some of the important works are Living Planet Index and the Living Planet Report. And the famous Earth Hour is also being celebrated by World Wildlife Fund. And then Global Footprint Network. This comes up with the important report or the Earth Overshoot Day. What is Earth Overshoot Day? That is that day wherein the environment has already exhausted giving whatever it could have given in that year, and from then on we are exploiting the future year's resources. Then come to next, Wildlife Trust of India. Friends, this deals with the conservation of wildlife in 6 priority areas in India, that is the Northeast India, Western Himalayas, Terai Southern Ghats, Central India and marine areas. So friends, these 6 specific areas are the working homes of Wildlife Trust of India, and moreover this is an Indian NGO. And then Bombay Natural History Society. This is also an NGO. These are not governmental organizations. And Bombay Natural History Society comes up with the National Dragonfly Festival and the Asian Waterbird Census. So these two we will remember. So these are some of the NGOs working in environmental issues. Then come to next, Disaster Management Institutes of India. So friends, here is an overview of all those institutes. Coming to the first one, the National Disaster Management Act. It was set up in 2005, and it gave up so many institutes and strategies, action plans, frameworks, etc. So we will discuss some of them here. So the first one is the National Disaster Management Authority. So this is headed by the Prime Minister himself, and it can be included with other ministers and other experts. So this takes the crucial decisions regarding the disaster management. And then we have Disaster Management Framework. So that provides for legal framework, financial framework, defense framework and others. Coming to the financial framework, so the National Disaster Management Framework, it provides for National Disaster Response Fund, and that is maintained under Public Accounts of India, and CAG can audit that as well. Earlier, this National Disaster Response Fund was called the National Climate Contingency Fund, and with the advent of NDMA, the nomenclature was changed. And then recently Supreme Court, it came up with the National Disaster Mitigation Fund. So that is, you should not only spend money to response or to provide rescue and relief operations, you should also spend money for mitigation, that is complete prevention or removal of disasters. And then coming to the defense or the personnel related framework, that is the National Disaster Response Force, and this was started on the deputation basis from BSF, CRPF, Sashastra Seema Bal and other paramilitary forces. And then we have State Disaster Response Forces, that is consisting of State Police and State Reserve Police Force. And we also have Home Guards, that is training civilians to help people in disasters. And then we have National Institute of Disaster Management. Earlier this was called the National Center for Disaster Management, and by the enactment of NDMA Act, the nomenclature was changed, and this gives expert advisors, and it will also work in research and development related to disaster management. So R&D sector is the prerogative of NIDM. And then we have Integrated Data Source Network. So almost all the data repositories or inventories of disaster risk reduction is being compiled and stored in this Integrated Data Resource Network. And then coming to the overall framework, friends, the latest schemes and strategies are being added in this disaster management framework. That is the National Disaster Management Plan, which was started in 2016 and which got updated in 2018, is also recorded in this framework. And then Government of India and UNDP partnership projects are also being taken up by this management framework. And then most of the National Disaster Management Framework clauses, they comply with the Sendai Framework. And then lastly we have National Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction. As we spoke in the earlier slides, this NPDRR will look into the assessment or the benchmarking of all those strategies. So how effectively they are working. So that is what the job of assessment of NPDRR. So this is an overall picture of the disaster management institutes in India. Then come to next, Retrons and CRISPR-Cas9. Friends, why was it in news? Because scientists, they say that Retrons can rival CRISPR-Cas9 in gene editing. So Retrons can edit the genes more effectively than CRISPR-Cas9. So friends, in this context, we discuss how CRISPR-Cas9 works. Friends, we know that DNA is a double helical structure. So DNA will be likewise. You agree with me? And now we will straighten this. So friends, a DNA of bacteria was assessed for 10 to 12 days under the uncontrolled environment. So after 10 to 12 days, these scientists, they found that some of the patches in these DNAs. So there were some patches like this. So on the studying of the patches, they found that these patches or these patched DNAs, they encoded for antiviral proteins. So they produced antiviral proteins. Friends, basically we know that DNA produces RNA and RNA produces proteins. So this we call it as transcription and this we call it as translation. So these patched DNAs, they translated for antivirals, and all these patches, they encoded for different antivirals. So by this, scientists concluded that this bacteria was being affected by viruses. So on day 1, it was affected by virus 1. So that is why this patch was added in the DNA. And in the day 2, second virus attacked the bacteria. So that is why this second patch was added. So it was a very important discovery which stated that when bacteria are infected by viruses, they alter the DNA or they edit the DNA by themselves. So this gene editing was first present in bacteria and humans learnt it from bacteria themselves. So now, how did this bacteria edit the DNA? So we will discuss. Firstly, this is the original DNA of the bacteria. And now, virus infects the bacteria. Now, it will add one more patch here. So now, how this will be added? Friends, there will be some other part of DNA which encodes for the immune system. So these parts of DNA, they will study the DNA of the virus or the RNA of the viruses. And they will get to know what kind of DNA should be created so that these DNAs will secrete antivirals so that they can kill this virus. So in other words, these DNAs, they will translate or they will produce DNAs. They will not produce proteins. So these DNAs which produces DNAs are called the non-coding DNAs. And those DNAs which produce proteins are called coding DNAs. So these non-coding DNAs, they didn't produce proteins, but rather they produced a specific sequence of DNA which encoded for those proteins which could have been secreted antivirals. And then these DNAs, they attached two enzymes to them, that is nuclease and helicase. And this whole system, it comes to the DNA of the bacteria and it searches for exact places. And in those exact places, this helicase, it will untwine the double helical structure and it will straighten them. And this nuclease, it will cut this double helical structure and it will add this new sequence. So this cutting and then adding the new sequence was done by this system. And this system in a whole, it was called the CRISPR-Cas9 system. Or what is Cas9? Cas9 is the CRISPR associated system. So this gene which is being synthesized is CRISPR. It is a clustered and it is regularly interspaced. So we know that these patches, they were regular in nature and they were palindromic repeats. That is, they were the palindromic mirror images of these viral DNAs. So friends, if we produce the mirror images of these virus DNAs, then automatically that DNA will encode to the proteins which can turn as antidote and which will kill the DNA of virus. So that is why these short palindromes and these short palindromic clusters are called clustered regularly interspaced palindromic repeats. So this Cas9 system or the CRISPR Cas9 system was taken as a system that can cut, copy and paste the DNA. So till now the CRISPR Cas9 was working as a gene editing tool. Then now came the retrons. So what are the negative impacts of CRISPR Cas9 and what are the advantages of these retrons? Friends, we know that this CRISPR Cas9 will cut and paste the gene. But however, in the course of cutting and pasting the gene, there will be some negative effects. That is, these CRISPR Cas9s, they can cut unwanted DNAs as well. But however, retrons, they will not cut, rather they will work in a different way. How they will work, friends? Friends, these retrons, they will wait till the cell will divide or the DNA of the cell will replicate. Friends, we know that during the replication, one more DNA will be produced. So now, one more DNA will be producing by the cell. So at this exact point of time, these retrons, they will interfere and they will add that specific DNA sequence which are required to encode antivirals. So here there is no need of cutting, rather during the growth itself they will introduce and the DNA will continue to grow during the replication. So this replication is made the best use of by these retrons. So now those unintentional cuts will be reduced, and that is why the retrons can act as an effective tool for gene editing rather than CRISPR Cas9. So this is what all about retrons is. I hope you have understood. Then come to next, mRNA. Friends, along with mRNA vaccine, we will discuss other types of vaccines as well here. First is the protein based vaccine. So what is this, friends? Here the spike of this coronavirus will be taken up and this spike protein will be directly introduced, and this spike will be get caught in the antibody. We have learnt the shape of antibody in the last class, and this antibody will curb the protein or the antigen, and that is how the immune system will be triggered. And now coming to next, the viral vector system. Here that gene of the coronavirus or that RNA sequence of coronavirus which will code for this spike protein will be extracted, and this has to be introduced into the body. Friends, this is not easily possible because if we directly introduce this RNA into the human body, then either human body will kill these RNAs or there are chances of these RNAs getting developed into the virus as a whole and destroying the human body. So what we use is a vector. So we will attach this segment of RNA into E. coli bacteria. So we know that E. coli is vastly used as a vector. So we bring E. coli bacteria and we will edit the gene of this E. coli bacteria and we will place this RNA sequence of coronavirus that codes for this spike protein. And now this E. coli will be introduced into human body. And now this E. coli will start producing that proteins which are similar to the spike protein of coronavirus. And as a result, these proteins, they will come and attach to the antibodies, and that is how immune system will be triggered. Now friends, this is a cumbersome process, we know that. So now scientists, what they found was that mRNA can be introduced instead of the gene. Friends, we know that the DNA of the coronavirus or the main RNA of coronavirus will transcript into mRNA or the messenger RNA. So this messenger RNA will then translate into proteins. So this messenger RNA is an intermediate substance before creation of these spike proteins. So if you extract this mRNA or the messenger RNA and then introduce into the body, these messenger RNAs will not only be stable inside the human body, but they can also use the human environment, human cell environment, and they can produce these spike proteins. And then these spike proteins, they get clogged into antibody and the immune system will be triggered. So it was a great discovery that these mRNAs will survive in the human cell independently without any vector. So after this mRNA vaccines, they came to the prominence in the vaccination industry. and many more mRNA vaccines might come up in the future as well. So this is all about mRNA vaccine. Then coming to the last part, friends, there goes a famous saying that rising without any fall may be great, but rising after every fall is the greatest. So never ever care for the minute failures. So your ability to fight back and come back matters a lot, rather than you shirking away from the losses and just striving for unfailured successes. So always strive for that success that comes after immense and intense failures. So strive for those successes which gives you immense happiness and satisfaction, and those successes which can be remembered throughout your life. So choose the battle rightly and do it. All the very best. Good luck, friends.